Imagine a student who uh, finally agrees to go to therapy, like after weeks of negotiation.
Right, which is a massive battle in itself for a lot of families.
Exactly. So they go, and then they come home from that very first session, drop their backpack on the floor, and just say, "My therapist doesn't get me. I'm not going back."
Yeah, that is a heartbreaking moment.
It really is. And I feel like your first instinct as a parent or, maybe as an educator listening to this is probably to just blame teenage angst.
Oh, absolutely. You just think they're being difficult.
Right. You think about the money, the scheduling, the sheer effort it took to just get them in that room, and you just want to push them back out the door. You tell yourself, like, therapy's uncomfortable, just give it time. The clinician has a degree.
Right, the whole doctor knows best mentality.
Yeah, exactly. But today's deep dive is actually going to prove why you should believe that student immediately, like without question.
Because we've really been conditioned to view that initial friction as just a normal part of the process, like a kind of resistance to healing.
Yeah, like they're just fighting the work.
Exactly. But the data shows that friction is actually a massive, glaring diagnostic indicator that the care is simply not going to be effective.
Wow.
Yeah, if a student feels fundamentally unseen in that room, pushing them back in is not only counterproductive, it can actively harm their relationship with mental health care for, well, for the rest of their life.
That is huge. So today we are looking at a huge stack of notes here, diving into the mechanics of cultural fit in clinical settings. And we're looking at this alongside the rollout of MentalSpace School's targeted services down in Georgia.
Yeah, their model is really fascinating.
It is. So our mission today is to completely dismantle the idea that cultural competence in student mental health is just like a nice bonus, something great to have if you can magically find it.
Right, like a cherry on top. It's not.
No, it's not. We are going to establish why it is the absolute non-negotiable foundation of effective care. Okay, let's unpack this. Because
Yeah.
the best way I can visualize this disconnect is to think about humor.
Okay, I like that.
Going to therapy without cultural alignment is essentially like trying to explain a highly specific, deeply layered inside joke to a total stranger.
Oh, man. That is painful just to think about.
All right. Even if that stranger technically speaks your exact same language, they are going to completely miss the context. They miss the history, the tone, and ultimately they just miss the punchline.
And you just end up sitting there in this awkward silence.
Exactly. Just staring at each other.
That analogy gets right to the heart of the psychological mechanics at play here. Because the entire process of therapy relies on a baseline of shared understanding.
Right. You need that common ground.
You have to have it. When a student walks into a room, they're bringing a massive, invisible ecosystem with them. I mean, their neighborhood, their family dynamics, their racial identity, their linguistic background.
It's a lot of invisible baggage.
Exactly. And the data points definitively to the fact that when a student sees a therapist who reflects or deeply understands that specific ecosystem, they're significantly more likely to actually stay in treatment.
Which is step one.
Right. And infinitely more likely to actually benefit from the clinical interventions.
Yeah, that retention aspect feels like the crucial first hurdle, doesn't it? I mean, a brilliant clinician means nothing if the kid just refuses to show up for session 2.
It's literally useless.
Yeah. And I imagine this heavily revolves around the concept of language, but not just the literal translation of words.
Right. Although that is important.
Well, yeah, obviously. If a student's primary language is Spanish and the provider only speaks English, the barrier is, physical and immediate. But the deeper issue here from the sources seems to be figurative language.
Yes, the figurative language is really where the therapeutic work lives or dies. We are talking about the unwritten rules of a student's existence.
What? Exactly.
Well, it is an implicit understanding of a student's family structure or just their lived experience moving through the world with a specific identity. Let's look at a practical example from the research.
Okay, lay it on me.
Imagine a student living in a multi-generational household, right? Where an aunt or grandmother is the primary authority figure.
Which is deeply common in so many cultures.
Exactly, very common. But if a therapist views that family structure through a rigid Western nuclear family lens, they might totally misinterpret that dynamic.
Ah, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, they might look at it as quote-unquote enmeshment or a lack of boundaries rather than seeing it for what it actually is, a vital support system.
So the therapist is basically diagnosing a cultural norm as a pathology.
Precisely. And what's fascinating here is, without this baseline of shared understanding, the actual therapeutic work cannot even begin.
Because they're stuck on square one.
Right. The student is forced to spend all of their emotional and cognitive energy just trying to translate their basic existence to the therapist.
Oh, that sounds so draining.
It is. They have to pause every 5 minutes to explain why they can't just, talk back to their elders, or why their specific neighborhood requires a certain level of hypervigilance just to walk home from school.
Wow. Yeah, if a kid is spending 40 minutes of a 50-minute session just explaining their cultural baseline, they aren't doing therapy at all.
No, not at all.
They're basically giving a sociology lecture to an adult. That sounds utterly exhausting for a teenager.
And that exhaustion leads directly to alienation. The student realizes, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, that the person tasked with helping them navigate their mind.
They don't even understand the world their mind inhabits.
Exactly. The trust just never forms.
So if the dynamic is that clear, right, and the data overwhelmingly supports that identity alignment is the actual bedrock of care, then the fact that every single clinic and school isn't already matching students this way,
It's frustrating, I know.
it tells me we have a fundamentally broken system. It just seems like the traditional clinical model is prioritizing raw logistics over healing. Like just getting a kid into a room.
Yeah, it absolutely is. The historical school-based therapy model operates almost entirely as a triage system. It was built for volume, right? Not for nuance.
Just turn them through.
Basically.
Yeah.
A school counselor who is likely managing a caseload of, 400 or 500 kids.
Which is insane on its own.
Totally insane. But they see a student in acute distress. So they look at a clinic schedule and see, oh, there's an opening on Tuesday at 3:00 p.m.
Okay.
The system does not ask who the therapist is. It doesn't ask what their background is or what the student's lived experience is. The system literally just asks, is the slot open?
Wow. So it treats mental health care like a broken arm. Just get them to the next available doctor.
Exactly. Any doctor will do.
But therapy isn't setting a bone. It requires profound emotional vulnerability. And treating it like a generic medical transaction is exactly why that teenager drops their backpack on the floor and refuses to go back.
Right. It completely ignores the human element.
Which brings us to the operational shift happening down in Georgia. Because MentalSpace School isn't just tweaking that old triage model, they seem to be completely redesigning the architecture of how a student gets care from the ground up.
Yeah, the architectural redesign starts with the human capital. They do not just passively hire whoever sends in a resume and simply hope the demographics kind of work out.
Right, hoping for the best.
No, they actively and intentionally build diverse therapist teams to deploy across these school districts. We are looking at dedicated pools of Black, Latina, Asian, multilingual, and LGBTQ plus affirming clinicians.
That is so intentional.
Very intentional. They are engineering a workforce that actually mirrors the real demographics of the student populations they serve.
And doing that fundamentally flips the triage model we were just critiquing, right? Because when a school partners with MentalSpace School, the default matching mechanism isn't the clock anymore.
No, the clock is secondary.
The students are matched by identity and cultural alignment first. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because to me, this is a total paradigm shift in how we view student support.
How so?
Well, think about it in terms of academics. It is the exact difference between assigning a struggling student a random generic tutor who just happens to be free during fourth period versus taking the time to find a tutor who specializes in the exact specific learning style or disability that student has.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to look at it.
Yeah, one is just a warm body supervising a desk. The other is a targeted intervention actually equipped to unlock the student's potential.
That parallel highlights the efficiency of the model perfectly. Because, a generic tutor might help a student with dyslexia stumble through a single worksheet.
Barely getting by.
Right. But a tutor trained specifically in dyslexic interventions changes that student's entire academic trajectory.
Exactly.
And in the mental health space, a culturally aligned therapist does the exact same thing for a student's emotional trajectory. They completely bypass the translation phase and get straight to the actual intervention.
But I want to make sure we don't paint this as just two people sitting in a room talking once a week, because the footprint MentalSpace establishes in these K-12 environments goes way beyond just isolated one-on-one sessions, doesn't it?
Oh, way beyond. The comprehensive wraparound services are just as vital.
Right.
The one-on-one culturally matched therapy is the anchor, sure. But you cannot treat a student in a vacuum. These dedicated teams are handling acute, immediate needs too.
Like what?
Like crisis intervention, and implementing systemic suicide and violence prevention programs across the school.
That's massive.
It is. They're also extending the care outward to offer family counseling, so they're addressing the home environment directly. And furthermore, and perhaps most crucially for the overall ecosystem of the building, they provide staff wellness support.
Oh, man. That is so necessary. A burnt-out teacher is a massive liability to a fragile student.
Yes.
Because teachers are carrying an unbelievable emotional load right now. They're often acting as de facto social workers anyway.
Right, they absorb so much trauma.
So giving the educators culturally competent support must completely change the ambient temperature of the school building.
That's exactly what it does.
Yeah.
When you support the staff, you stabilize the environment the student returns to after their therapy session.
That makes so much sense.
It creates a real systemic safety net, rather than just handing a few students isolated lifeboats while the entire ship is taking on water.
Right. Right. Okay, so I get the theory. A holistic, culturally aligned, wraparound team sounds like a brilliant concept on paper.
Right.
But practically speaking, public schools are incredibly chaotic environments. You can have the most culturally attuned clinicians sitting in an office, but if a kid is chronically truant, dodging class, and completely disengaged from the educational process, how does identity matching actually translate into hard numbers?
You want the metrics.
Yeah. Are there real, measurable metrics proving this utopian ideal actually works?
The metrics are honestly the most compelling part of this entire operational shift. When you move from a convenience-based triage model to an identity-aligned model, the outcomes become staggering.
Hit me.
MentalSpace School's methodology yields an 89% improvement in attendance for the students utilizing the service.
Wait, 89%.
89%.
Wow. If I'm a school administrator, an 89% attendance bump is an unbelievable metric. But let's unpack why that happens. Because a kid doesn't just suddenly decide they love geometry because they went to therapy.
No, definitely not.
If a system is that broken, bringing in culturally aligned therapists must dramatically shift the student's perception of the building itself. You can't put a kid in a room where they finally feel safe without that bleeding over into their academics.
Exactly. Because chronic absenteeism is rarely about a student simply refusing to do academic work.
Right.
It is overwhelmingly a symptom of untreated anxiety, profound depression, or a pervasive feeling of alienation from the institution itself.
The school is the source of the stress.
Exactly. So when a school provides a student with a professional who unequivocally gets them, who understands their neighborhood, their family, their unique pressures, the school ceases to be an alienating force.
It becomes a safe haven.
Yes, it becomes a site of safety.
Yeah.
The student attends school because the school is facilitating their healing.
That reframes truancy completely. And I'd imagine the clinical progression must accelerate dramatically, too, if you remove that barrier of explaining your culture.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if a kid isn't fighting a two-front war, battling their anxiety while also battling to be understood by their therapist, the actual clinical interventions can take root almost instantly.
We see that acceleration directly in the clinical outcomes, too. There is a 92% reduction in anxiety among these students.
92%. That is almost total mitigation for those individuals.
It's incredible. And it speaks to the incredible efficiency of care when the figurative language matches.
Yeah.
The physiological burden of being misunderstood is heavy, you know?
Yeah.
It keeps a student in a state of fight or flight.
Constantly on edge.
Right. So when that burden is lifted in the very first session, the clinician can immediately begin implementing cognitive behavioral strategies, emotional regulation techniques, and trauma processing.
Because the trust was established in minute 1, not month 3. And that trust clearly extends to the home, too, because looking at the family metrics in our notes, an 85% family satisfaction rate is virtually unheard of.
Oh, in this field, it's astronomical.
Anyone who has ever tried to navigate the mental health system knows it is typically defined by frustration, endless wait lists, and just, frankly, disappointment.
Right. The family satisfaction rate is a direct reflection of the family counseling component, and honestly, the relief parents feel when they are no longer fighting the system. It validates the parent's struggle.
But okay, we have to address the elephant in the room here.
Do it.
The numbers are phenomenal, the cultural matching is clearly effective, but accessibility is the other half of this battle.
Always.
You can have the best, most perfectly aligned therapist in the world, but if a student can't physically get to their office, or if the family is going bankrupt trying to pay the copays, the model fails.
It falls apart completely.
Logistical and financial barriers are the silent killers of mental health care. So how do they handle that?
Well, if the model isn't accessible, the clinical outcomes are irrelevant. MentalSpace School targets the logistical barriers by utilizing a same-day teletherapy model right within the school.
Same-day teletherapy. So no more pulling a kid out of third period, a parent leaving work early, losing hourly wages, driving 45 minutes across town, sitting in a waiting room for an hour, and then driving back.
None of that.
The care just happens seamlessly inside the school building the exact day the intervention is needed.
Yes. It completely neutralizes the geographical and transportation barriers that typically prevent lower-income families from maintaining consistent care.
That's huge.
But the physical access is only half the equation, right? The financial structure is where the real democratization of care happens.
Because therapy is notoriously expensive. I mean, navigating out-of-network benefits and deductibles is enough to make any family abandon the process entirely. How does this model survive the insurance nightmare?
MentalSpace has structured their operational model to basically absorb that friction on behalf of the families.
Oh.
They accept virtually all major private insurances, which covers a massive swath of the population. We are talking BCBS, Cigna, Aetna, UHC.
Oh, wow, so the big ones.
Yeah, the major players. Plus Humana, Peach State, CareSource, and AmeriGroup.
Okay, so that's comprehensive.
It is. But the most critical financial detail, and really the one that fundamentally shifts equity in Georgia, is their Medicaid policy.
Which is?
For Medicaid patients, the out-of-pocket cost is exactly $0.
$0. Wow. They are actively removing every single excuse a broken system normally gives a family.
Every single one.
You don't have to drive anywhere. You don't have to miss work. Your kid is matched with someone who actually understands their culture. And if you are on Medicaid, it costs you absolutely nothing.
It is a masterclass in removing friction from the point of care.
It really is.
But, there's another pressing reality driving this implementation right now, and it shifts the conversation from clinical outcomes to state-level compliance.
Right, because this isn't just about clinical best practices anymore. State governments are starting to mandate tighter frameworks around student health.
Okay.
And in Georgia, there is a very real ticking clock for school districts. Today is April 19th, 2026. What exactly is coming down the pipeline for these superintendents?
Georgia school districts are staring down the barrel of the July 2026 deadline for HB 268 compliance.
Okay, that is right around the corner.
It is looming. Legislation around student health, data privacy, and mandatory support structures is becoming increasingly stringent, and the penalties for non-compliance are severe.
Yeah, I bet.
Superintendents are literally losing sleep over how to implement these mandates without bankrupting their districts or accidentally violating privacy laws.
And MentalSpace provides a turnkey solution for that exact nightmare, don't they?
Exactly.
They don't just parachute in therapists. They provide the back-end support for HB 268 compliance right alongside standard HIPAA and FERPA regulations.
And all in one package.
So a school district can partner with them knowing they are getting superior clinical outcomes while completely securing their legal and regulatory frameworks before that July cliff.
Right. It allows educators to actually focus on education, knowing that the mental health and compliance infrastructure is being managed by specialized experts.
Which brings us back to the parent listening right now. Maybe you are that parent who fought tooth and nail to get your kid into therapy a year ago.
Yeah.
You spent hours on the phone with insurance, you drove across town, and you watched it fail because the therapist just didn't get your child. Maybe you just gave up. So what does this all mean for a parent listening right now who gave up on therapy for their kid a year ago?
It means the failure was never your child's fault. And it was certainly never your fault as a parent.
That is so important to hear.
You were operating inside a system that set you up for failure by prioritizing a schedule over a human connection.
The mandate here is incredibly powerful. If you have tried therapy before and felt unseen, try again. The right therapist changes the entire equation. And for families in Georgia who are ready to find that right fit, who want to bypass that old triage model, you can meet these diverse, culturally aligned therapists today at mentalspaceschool.com, or you can email them directly at mentalspaceschool@checktherapy.com.
The infrastructure is built, the clinicians are ready, and the barriers to entry have been completely dismantled.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I just want to consolidate everything we've uncovered today, because it is abundantly clear that effectively treating student mental health requires so much more than a clinician with a medical degree.
A degree is literally just the baseline admission ticket.
Right. Truly effective care requires shared lived experience. It requires seamless, same-day access right inside the school building. It requires a financial model that doesn't punish marginalized families.
Absolutely.
And crucially, it requires school districts willing to be brave enough to prioritize identity matching over mere scheduling convenience.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we are witnessing a necessary evolution in how society views mental health care entirely. We must fundamentally stop viewing a student's cultural background, their language, and their family structure as just like secondary biographical trivia.
Right, it's not background noise.
No, it is the primary lens through which their healing must take place.
Mm.
If you ignore the lens, the picture will always remain out of focus no matter how hard you try to fix it.
That is a perfect way to put it. And that leaves me with a final thought for you to mull over today. We've spent this time exploring the hard data, the 89% better attendance, the massive drops in anxiety, proving that matching a student's cultural and linguistic identity is the ultimate key to unlocking their mental well-being and their academic potential.
Yeah.
But if that mechanism holds true for clinical therapy, how might this realization force us to completely rethink the rest of their world? If being seen is the absolute prerequisite for engagement, how does this force us to rethink the way we train our future educators, our sports coaches, and our school leaders who interact with these exact same students every single day?
The clinical world is proving the model. It is only a matter of time before the educational world has to follow suit.
Because at the end of the day, whether you are in a therapist's office, a math class, or on a basketball court, nobody wants to spend their life trying to explain the punchline of an inside joke to a stranger.
Especially when it's about their own life.
Exactly. You just want someone to sit across from you, hear the setup, and finally laugh along with you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.